AlanMDershowitz, Why Terrorism Works, Understanding the Threat, Responding to the Challenge. In Why Terrorism Works, Understanding the Threat, Responding to the Challenge, author Alan M. Dershowitz delves deep into the roots of terrorism since the Munich Olympic massacre in 1972, and examines the patterns of violence over the years. The book serves as a stark reminder that the approach to fighting terrorism has failed, allowing it to thrive as the defining issue of our age. Furthermore, the author argues that addressing root causes won't sufficiently deal with terrorism, and instead, we must refuse to engage with terrorists and their political demands. Only through a combination of deterrence and punishment can terrorism be effectively combated.
Seeds of Terrorism. The Munich massacre in 1972 was a seminal moment in the history of terrorism. The Israeli team members were taken hostage and eventually killed by Palestinian terrorists. The German government's response to the attack and subsequent negotiations with the terrorists created a blueprint for today's terrorism. The Germans failed to prevent the attack despite knowing about the possibility and botched the rescue operation. They also struck a secret deal with the terrorists to release 3 of them, thus leading to further acts of terrorism. The Munich massacre laid the groundwork for contemporary terrorism and emphasized the need to respond firmly to such acts of violence. It highlighted the fact that even if terrorists have legitimate grievances, resorting to violence and terror will not lead to listening or understanding. Terrorism has become the defining issue of our age, and a tough response is necessary to counter it. Rational response to terrorism. Many people argue that fighting terrorism requires addressing its root causes. This premise is false, and responding to terrorists with anything other than military action represents a capitulation to their political goals. The international community's awarding of Nobel Peace Prizes and honorary degrees to terrorist leaders promotes their cause. The rational response to terrorism is to reject its root causes and establish the principle that terrorism will not be tolerated. Terrorism should lead to punishment, not political dialogue. The Paradoxes of Terrorism. Addressing the root causes of terrorism may actually incite more terrorist attacks, while brutally repressing it fuels its growth. But of the 2 paradoxes, the first is stronger. Terrorist movements rely on charismatic leaders to advance their cause, and refusing to engage with these leaders can compromise their effectiveness and support. Meanwhile, suppressing terrorism only makes potential followers more susceptible to recruitment. Thus, degrading the capabilities and credibility of powerful terrorist leaders may be the most effective way of combating terrorism. Appeasement of terrorism in Europe. Despite its dismal record in dealing with terrorism, European governments have preferred appeasement and negotiation to punishment and incapacitation. Starting with the 1968 hijacking that resulted in the release of hijackers and Arab prisoners, European governments repeatedly rewarded terrorists with political concessions without imposing severe punishment. The trend continued with the release of the Palestinian gunmen who attacked an El Al airplane in Athens, and hijackers who attacked El Al planes in Zurich and Rome. Even the adoption of a long-sought Arab resolution recognizing the inalienable rights of Palestinians by the United Nations General Assembly in response to increased Palestinian terrorism did not deter European appeasement. This culminated in the Munich airport attack that resulted in the release of terrorists, and the Swiss air jet bombing that killed 47 people. European governments also released terrorists who murdered the U.S. Assistant Military Attaché in Jordan, and those who attempted to take over a flight from Amsterdam to New York. In contrast, the author believes that terrorism should only be met with punishment and incapacitation instead of negotiation and consideration of root causes. The Achille Lauro hijacking. In October 1985, the hijacking of the Italian cruise ship Achille Lauro by Palestinian terrorists marked a shocking example of European appeasement. The terrorists murdered Leon Klinghoffer, a Jewish-American man in a wheelchair, leading to Italian Prime Minister's permission for their release. The U.S. military intercepted the hijackers' plane, but Italian soldiers blocked them from approaching. Eventually, 4 hijackers were brought to justice, 2 terrorist leaders were released, and the remaining 2 prisoners escaped while on leave from an Italian prison. The kidnapping demonstrated how terrorists exploit appeasement, using brutal murders and other horrific forms of violence to legitimize their cause. The dark side of Yassir Arafat. Yassir Arafat's sinister actions during the 1972 Olympic massacre and the subsequent embassy attack in Khartoum reveal his true nature as a ruthless terrorist. He personally ordered the torture and murder of 2 American and 1 Belgian diplomats who were kidnapped by Palestinian terrorists seeking the release of Sirhan, Robert Kennedy's assassin. Arafat's disregard for human life and his willingness to use violence for political gain should be a cautionary tale for those who seek a peaceful resolution to the Middle East conflict. Fighting terrorism, a dual-level strategy. To combat terrorism effectively, actions must be taken at both the macro and micro levels. At the macro level, it's crucial to eliminate the incentives for terrorism by refusing to negotiate with terrorist groups and by imposing severe punishments on terrorists. At the micro level, preemptive action should be taken to neutralize known terrorist threats. The use of terrorism as a strategy can be discouraged by determined action, as exemplified by the Israeli Secret Service's successful pursuit of Olympic massacre perpetrators. The book encourages a comprehensive 2-pronged approach to counterterrorism.
At the heart of Dershowitz's argument is the belief that the only effective way to combat terrorism is to refuse to address its root causes and to punish terrorists without engaging with their political demands. He supports this with historical examples of countries that have appeased terrorist activities, which has inevitably led to further violence and perpetuated the problem. By demystifying complex notions, Dershowitz offers a thought-provoking exploration of the issues surrounding terrorism and outlines the steps necessary to confront the threat head-on, emphasizing the need for both macro and micro-level action. Focusing on preemption and punishment of known terrorists, as well as revoking legitimacy to their causes, provides a viable pathway toward combating this looming threat.